It has now been over 2 years since we've gotten any information on the Hell Arc of Bleach, and a lot of people are still to this day discussing who they think the enemies of the Hell Arc are going to be, and I feel like there's definitely two likely candidates. It's either going to be the deceased captains, or it's going to be the Espada, or it could be a kind of mix of the two of them put together, and we could see a lot of different fights going on, but I definitely do think it's going to be these two groups that make a prominent return into the manga whenever the Hell Arc begins again. In this video, I kind of wanted to go over the likely representatives from each of these different factions that might show up in the Hell Arc and who they're going to fight, maybe, you know, what they're going to be doing and kind of what motivations they're going to have moving forward into the arc. I also want to go over why exactly the captains would maybe be fighting the regular Gotei 13, you know, why the Espada, of course, would kind of want to fight, and just a lot of different things kind of going into the enemies of the Hell Arc and, you know, how they're going to fight, what they're going to fight with, and how that could all proceed. With that being said, though, if you enjoy anything you see here today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as it really does help me, and I really do appreciate each and every one of you guys for sticking around and watching my content. Thank you. So of course, before we begin with the video, I do want to go over exactly why the gates have essentially opened up in the manga and why we're kind of even going through this where the gates are open. You know, a lot of different stuff is happening, and that is honestly because of the fact that the balance has sort of tipped in the story. Ever since the defeat of Yhwach and the imprisonment of Aizen, the balance has kind of shifted. All that Reiatsu, you know, everything that Yhwach was, everything that Aizen was, and obviously Aizen is still alive, but because of his garb and because of the fact that he's kind of, you know, in prison right now, his Reiatsu is very close to him. It isn't really out in the world, so I can definitely see why there's a sort of balance shift. You know, you have these really strong people out in the world of the living, you know, just out and about. You know, one of them is defeated, one of them is in prison, so you're kind of having them messing with the balance. And on top of that, it was the deceased or the defeat of three of the, you know, very strong captains, of course being Unohana, Yamamoto, and Ukitake, them being taken out together in very quick succession. You know, they're all taken out very soon after one of another, so that kind of really tipped the balance. It shifted everything, and you get those three getting sent to the hell. You know, they're all getting sent at the same time. It's going to mess up everything, and that is of course why we're kind of even going through all this, why the Hell Arc even exists, and you know what's kind of going on with the story so far. Just in case anybody wanted the kind of cliff notes as to why this is even happening, that is why. I feel like since he made a very prevalent role in the first chapter of the arc, I do feel like we need to talk about Zayelaporro and kind of what his role in the arc is going to be and what he could accomplish. And obviously he's one of the Espada, and he's one of the biggest reasons as to why we feel like a lot of the Espada are going to make a big return. And what we see from him in the beginning of this arc is that he has completely changed. There is something about, I guess, being inside of that environment for so long that completely twists you and makes you look way different than what you did, which he still has the same general body shape. We do see that he still has like the same kind of essence of what he used to be, but we see he has these twisted markings all over him, and just everything about him seems more, you know, more terrifying, more twisted, more angry. It just seems like being in this environment for as long as he has, which it's been a while now. It's been a good amount of years since he was, you know, maybe deposited there, and we see that it's completely twisted him. And another thing that I've noticed is that he does not use the same powers that he had before in the story. Obviously when he was fighting Mayuri, he doesn't really use those anymore, and I feel like that's probably going to be a sort of theme with the arc, where you're not necessarily going to have them using the same abilities that they had before. We do see that with him, he doesn't use any of the abilities that he previously had. It seems like there's a whole completely different sort of power system in that arc, where he was using way different attacks than what he had previously used, and I feel like this is going to be a common occurrence with all of the different characters, all of the different people that may or may not come back into the arc. You know, they're probably going to have different powers than what they previously had, which I find very interesting. This would make the fights very refreshing. We get to see the same person that we know of, but we're going to see them fight in a different way than they previously did in the story, and I just find that very interesting, just, you know, with the design perspective of what he looks like now and the fact that he isn't using these same powers. Another thing that I found very interesting is the fact that when he was speaking to Renji, we see that he starts to kind of transform. He gains these horns in the top of his head, and he mentions the fact that this is kind of coming from his rage or his anger, you know, his malicious intent, and it seems like maybe that is going to be a kind of power system in and of itself. You know, people that are just very twisted and have a lot of rage in them are probably going to be able to draw from that to to literally give them a power boost or give them different transformations. And maybe this is kind of just him because he has been there so long. Maybe that is the reason as to why he's able to kind of just manifest these horns. Maybe it's something that you kind of have to build up to while being inside of that environment. Maybe you don't start off like that. Maybe you're kind of your regular self, and as you're kind of in there, just feeling all this malicious intent from around you, just all these bad different things, bad vibes, you sort of start to change, and maybe that is what is occurring with him. I also love the detail that his entire left arm is seemingly kind of just taken over by this black miasma, this kind of black flame looking piece of his arm is there, and I find this very interesting. It kind of makes me wonder, like, do you go through this transformation and eventually become a full kind of form of that black kind of miasma, black Reiatsu? We're just not sure what it is, but I'm wondering if that's kind of like your final form, like as you progress through this new environment, like you maybe eventually become something that is completely taken over and you just have that black flaming stuff all around your body, and maybe that's kind of your complete transformation into being in this environment. I do also just love the fact that he was introduced as the jailer. This is the one person that it makes sense that you would see as you come into this environment. You see somebody that is already slowly becoming a proper member of the Hell, and we know that he's very strong. We can see that he's very strong. The fact that he is a jailer, he kind of has a higher position, and it makes us wonder, is there different positions inside of this world? Are there just different kind of levels and you work your way up to different positions, or is he kind of just taking on this role as a jailer himself? And if he's a jailer, is there somebody kind of calling the shots? Like, is there somebody else out there that is calling the big shots? Or it just doesn't really make sense. We don't know a lot, but it just is interesting the fact that he's introduced as a jailer, and we see him as somebody that's already kind of twisted, somebody's going through their transformation, and it just makes you wonder as to what the other people here have to do. Maybe there's wardens, maybe there's kind of different people, and you go up the levels, and maybe he's kind of like in the middle a little bit. He's a jailer, but maybe there's people higher up than him. I do want to kind of go over the requirements that it takes to even get sent here, and why a couple different people that maybe you do want to see in the story aren't necessarily maybe going to make an appearance in this arc. I'm of course speaking about some of the Espada members, two of the biggest kind of ones being Ulquiorra and Baragon, and the reasoning as to why they can't really make it there is because of the fact that Baragon himself was taken out due to his own power. To be able to go into the Hell, you have to have committed very heinous crimes as a human, then you become a hollow. Of course, you go through your process, you do all of that, and then you have to actually be taken out by a Zanpakuto that kind of purifies you of all of your sins, and that's kind of like the basic gist of it. So people like Baragon, who are taken out by his own powers, even if he was at one point a human, that did, heinous crimes in his life, he isn't going to be able to come back into the arc just because of the fact that it was kind of him that took himself out. So I guess he just kind of gets recycled into the universe itself. He doesn't necessarily go here, but he'll get recycled in some type of way. I'm pretty sure there's like an explanation as to what kind of happens to him, since he himself took his own self out technically, but he's not going to make an appearance. And the same thing kind of goes for Ulquiorra. He kind of just disintegrated into that ash thing. He didn't necessarily get taken out by his Zanpakuto, so I don't think that he's going to have the chance to actually make a return inside of the arc. You of course can't also be sent here if you were born as a hollow. So if you're just a hollow that naturally exists in the world, you can't actually be able to go to Hell because of the fact that you haven't committed any crimes technically as a human. So people like Stark, which I do want to see him return, we just don't know kind of exactly what his history is. We don't know if he had a kind of human soul before he became a hollow, or kind of what's going on with him. So I do want to see him return. We just don't know if he can right now. I feel like some of the other likely candidates that will return as the Espada enemies in this arc are definitely going to be someone like Yami. I can definitely see him having committed very heinous crimes if he was a human at one point. Easily you can see that with Yami. He's just a brute, he's a meathead, he's somebody that is just very violent. So he would also really make a lot of sense for this arc, just if we see a kind of twisted version of Yami, somebody that's way stronger, is very twisted by this environment. I do want to see if he does make an appearance inside of the arc, and it would make a lot of sense. Another person that would make a lot of sense is Noitora. He does kind of meet the criteria of being in the arc as long as he was a human at some point, and it would be very interesting. He's some people's favorite character out of the Espada. He wasn't really my favorite, but I do want to see him back in the arc, and if we can get a lot of these different Espada members just back, it means a longer arc also, which I do want this arc to be very long. I want it to go very in depth, and I just want to see these other characters that we haven't seen in so many years come back. With that being said though, we're kind of past all of the different Espada members, the criteria as to how they can even get there and all the different things kind of, pertaining to the Espada. So we can now jump into the 3 members of the Soul Society that kind of completely messed up the balance with them going into the arc, and that is obviously going to be Yamamoto, Unohana, and Ukitake. And the only member of those 3 that we do see inside of the arc is Ukitake, and we see that he appears, but we don't necessarily see him fully. We just see his Shikai, and we see that his Shikai is completely huge. Like, it is a very, very huge version of his Shikai, and we do know that this does happen to captains if they're kind of unable to contain their Ryatsu and control it. Their swords end up becoming the size of skyscrapers. We got a confirmation of that, during the fight with Gin, and just in general in the story, we get confirmation that like they kind of have to control their Ryatsu, because if they don't, their swords will just be huge. So what this does kind of tell me is that he's maybe losing kind of grasp on his own power, and this kind of goes into what I was saying before, where it seems like the longer you stay in here, the less and less you're yourself, and you kind of become a whole different being in and of itself. And I feel like that's kind of starting to happen to him. We have to remember that he had just recently been thrust into this world. It hasn't been a long time since he was sent here, so he's probably kind of finally going through that process of losing his humanity, quote unquote, or what makes him a soul reaper, and he's probably kind of turning into a denizen of this world. And maybe the fact that that's happening is the idea that his Shikai is very huge. He's unable to control his Zanpakuto now, and he's going to slowly lose that ability to and gain new abilities. And I feel like this is going to be very present for all of the different members that have been sent here, and it's just a very nice showing, and it's very cool that we do see that it is his Shikai. It's completely a Shikai, it's just that it's huge now, and the only reason as to why that would be is that he's losing his ability to control his Ryatsu. What this means for all of the other 2 members, Unohana and Yamamoto, is that they're probably going to do something very similar. They're probably going to still have access to their Shinigami powers, but I feel like we're going to kind of see a mix of the Shinigami powers and maybe, this new power that they unlock, just being in that world with those black flames, and kind of just, a little bit of what we saw Zayelaporro doing. And I feel like they'd be so cool, like seeing them use their own abilities, but also kind of use it in tandem with these new abilities that they probably gained from this environment. And this could make some very cool fights where we don't necessarily know what to expect from them. Like, we know their abilities obviously when they were Shinigami, but it's going to be completely different going into the arc and seeing them fight with new abilities on top of what they already have. So it's just going to make the arc very interesting for these different captains. These 3 captains, very fan favorites. Can you imagine Unohana, using her abilities in tandem with like these black flames, and we see her maybe even go bankai, but it's like a little bit different. I can just imagine, what this will look like, and just how much of a spectacle this whole entire thing would be if we do get this in the manga, which is why I can't wait for Kubo to finally kind of delve deeper into the arc, give us some more chapters, and finally let us go on with everything. Now, of course, the final faction that I feel we need to talk about, and one of the most prevalent, one of the biggest people that everybody's like maybe they will make it return, is the original captains. And the only reason why I say this is that we do know that they have to kind of go through that ceremony supposedly 12 years after they die, and that is what gets them sent into hell. But we just don't know if this happened with the original Gotei 13. We don't know if they're all still alive. We don't know anything about them. So I feel like we also can't, throw out the idea that maybe they all passed away. Maybe none of them are, alive in the world present, and they all got sent to this environment. And if that is the case, they would have been there for a long time. So we're going to see all of them back in the manga. And, of course, recently in the anime, we got, full color space spreads of what they look like. So it's very interesting. I feel like it would make the most sense for Kubo to introduce them into this final arc. Now that everybody knows what they look like, we've waited so long to see them. We know what they look like. We kind of know what their Zanpakuto, what their abilities are right now. Just a little bit. We know what they look like, at least some of their Shikais, a lot of them just their regular unreleased form. So it would just be very interesting seeing them in the manga, seeing them, finally do something. We get them back in the story, and seeing how maybe, glimpses of what they used to fight like, seeing what they are now, because they would have most likely become very twisted. They're full denizens of this world now if they've been there as long as we think they have. All in all, I think it's just a very good speculation to think that they would make an appearance, and it would just make the most sense on Kubo's part. And I really hope he does employ this. I hope he does bring them back into the story, since it would just make the most sense. Like, you have all these different very interesting characters that everybody's already very attached to, everybody loves, and it would make sense to utilize them inside of this big arc, along with all the other captains. Just kind of have a lot of crazy stuff going on, and I feel like they could definitely do this. It would definitely be very interesting, and I feel like Kubo really does need to implement these people into the newest chapters of the arc that he, will hopefully eventually put out. It would make the most sense. It's of course hard to speculate as to what their abilities would be, since we just don't really even have their regular Shinigami abilities down. We know what a couple of their Zanpakuto look like, in their released forms and their Shikai, but we just don't know anything about these characters. But of course, like I said, we would learn about them. We'll probably get kind of glimpses as to how they did fight, added in with the fact that they're now, full denizens of this world, so they're kind of gonna be fighting different. They're gonna look a little bit different from what we see in that color page spread. They're gonna be a little bit different, but it would just be very interesting, and I feel like this is the best way to implement these characters into the story, and it would make a lot of sense for them to even be there. With that being said though, that's kind of my breakdown of the different kind of factions, or the different people that were most likely going to be present in this arc. I feel like it does make the most sense having the Espada, of course, come back, different members of the Espada, having of course the 3 captains that we know of, Unohana, Ukitake, and Yamamoto come back, and of course the original members of the Gotei 13, all of them. It would make so much sense for them to come back. It just makes the most sense. It's the best way to implement them into the story, and it would just make sense to utilize these characters instead of kind of just wasting them as a sort of thought, giving us a glimpse in the anime. It would just make sense to utilize these characters in the manga. If you agree with anything I said here today, don't forget to tell me in the comment section down below. Also, if you do feel like there's a couple other different people that could make it into the arc, let me know too. I want to see what everybody else thinks, if everybody kind of agrees with what I say, and if I said anything wrong today, definitely let me know. It's of course been a while since I read Bleach, so my Bleach knowledge isn't the best right now, but if I said anything wrong here today, just let me know in the comments. I'll correct it. Thank you. With that being said though, I'm out. Peace.